Thank you, John. Now, what I've been asked to talk to you about is inequality. I'm going to talk mostly about equality in the distribution of household income after taxes and benefits and adjusted for differences in household size, which is the most usual way of looking at income insofar as it represents command over resources or living standards, and assessing its degree of equality or inequality. Now, what I want to do is talk about where we've come from and where we are in thinking about where we may be going. Because in trying to do that, you get some sense, at least, of the sort of channels of influence from the macroeconomy to the distribution of income. And I think it's those that we have to try and get our heads around and understand. As I'll say, the way these balance out, as I will say, the way these balance out or net out in terms of a net impact on the conventional measures of income inequality are hard to assess. Hard to assess in the past, much less the future. But it's understanding the channels of influence and seeing what we can do to respond that I think is the most important thing. Now, what I wanted to do first was give you some sense of the big picture background here in terms of what has been happening to income inequality over the last 20 or 25 years in the OECD countries. And I can recommend to you a superb new publication from the OECD called Growing Unequal, important question mark, which looks at exactly this issue. And this is, in some sense, its summary of a very large and very rich volume, which, if you bars to the right of the line are increases in the most widely used summary measure of income inequality, which is the Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient ranges, in theory, from 0 to 1. In the countries we're looking at is normally somewhere between 0.2 and 0.4. And what this is saying is, did it go up or did it go down from the mid-80s to the mid-90s, which is the left-hand block of bars, from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, which is the middle, and cumulatively over that whole 20-year period on the right. And the big picture message is that in about 2/3 of the OECD countries, income inequality as measured by this very crude single summary measure went up. So and went up quite substantially. I'll talk about the scale of the increase in a sec, but it went up quite substantially. Now remember, this is the distribution of income, disposable income, after the impact of direct taxes and cash transfers. So this is after the most important mechanisms that the state has to cushion the impact of changes in the distribution of market income have already had their impact. So you can take it that the trends in the distribution of market income were towards much more substantial increases in inequality. So we've been looking at a world over the last 20 years where the norm was for income inequality, measured this way among households and so on, has been on an upward trend. It isn't, as we sometimes tend to think, it isn't a universal trend, and it isn't even, looking at individual countries, you get different trends from one 10-year period to the next. But by and large, it's on an upward trend. Now, why is that? It's for a whole bucket of reasons that this OECD study in particular does a pretty good job of trying to disentangle. It's certainly to do with some mixture of globalization and skill-biased technological change. But it's also influenced by changes in the demographic composition of populations and by tax and welfare policy. So this is the background against which we want to look at what's been happening in Ireland over our most recent experience. Now, in looking at that previous graph, I hope you weren't able to pick out Ireland. So I wasn't particularly interested in you looking at any individual country. It was the broad picture I wanted you to get. But of course, in all these exercises, you look at these numbers for other countries and you say, that's very interesting. and you look at the number of your own country and you say, I'm not sure that's right. And indeed, I don't think that the picture that this OECD study gives of what's been happening in Ireland is entirely accurate. Although I should say that they got some of the numbers from me. So we'll worry about that another day. So, depending on where you look, whether you look at an OECD source, an EU source, or at national studies, you may get a different sense of what's been going on to this summary measure of income inequality over the last 20 years or so. This is my best stab at what's been going on. These numbers all come from household surveys, which have their own quirks, and which there's a number of different surveys. But this summary measure has been in the rather narrow range from 0.31 to 0.32 from 1987, when we first had a reliable fix on it, through 1994, the late 90s, 2000, and up to the Household Budget Survey in 2004. So it's been in a narrow range. In the most recent set of surveys that we rely on now, called EU Silk, which the CSO carries out and has done so since 2003, the Gini coefficient has been stuck at 0.32 since they started doing it. Now, if you go to the third decimal place, you can get a bit of difference, but it's not, I suspect, statistically significant. So you might say, well, this either isn't what we thought was going on, or stepping back from what we might or might have thought, is surprising, because obviously over this period from 1987, when unemployment was very high indeed, or what we thought then was very high indeed, through the Delta Tiger years, and now up to 2000, the number for 2007 is about the same. That's just come out. You might say this is a bit surprising. Well, one explanation could be that a single summary measure can't capture everything that's happening in a distribution, and that it's more revealing to look at, for example, the conventional way of doing it, is to rank households or individuals into successive 10% or deciles on the basis of their income, and compare the share that they have in total income over time, and how that's changed. And this is what this does from the mid-90s to 2006. And what you can see is down at the bottom, the poorest 10% saw not very much change over that whole period, taking the start and the end at least, in their total share in disposable income. The 10% at the top saw some increase, but that was mostly was compensated for arithmetically by a decline in the share going to the rest of the top half, not the bottom half. Now, you have to have a serious health warning over the information that you get from these surveys about what's going on at the very top of the income distribution. Because no survey can hope to capture reliably what's happening to the top 1%, 0.5%, or even 0.1% of income holders who have quite a substantial proportion of the income. My suspicion is, and I should also say that last observation is for the new survey, EU Silk, and it may not be fully comparable with the previous surveys. It seems in particular not to have captured capital income to quite the extent that they did. Now, before going on to talk about what has been going on right at the top of the distribution, it's worth putting that rather stable level of income inequality in Ireland into some sort of international comparative context. And that's where we rank. If you want to rank us on this measure, you want to treat this as some sort of a social indicator, we rank as high, but by no means among the highest in the OECD, and certainly above average, again above average in the EU 27, and similarly in the EU 15. We're high, but we're in a group of countries that have rather similar summary inequality measures to ourselves. We can't, I don't think, be described as the highest or being among the highest. But we're high. We're substantially above average. Now, to return to what's been going on over time, one of the biggest, one of the most marked trends in income inequality generally over the last 20 years has been